Hello friends, and welcome back to another episode of Tales from the Haunted Victorian, where I recount true paranormal experiences that happened to me and my family in an old haunted house in St. John's, Newfoundland, Canada. If this is your first time joining us, I'll be sure to leave all of the other episodes linked down below in the description box, so you can go back and listen to the story from the beginning. But on this episode, I would like to recount the continuing story, part 2. So in the first part of the continuing story, I had moved out of Newfoundland and moved in with my older brother and his family here in Calgary, Alberta. And shortly after that, I decided that I was going to move in with my boyfriend at the time. And we started to have escalating paranormal activity happening in that house for the entire time that we were there. So at the beginning, it kind of started out a little bit slow. So we would experience all of the normal things like hearing footsteps, things moving on their own. We had faucets that would turn on. We would have toilets that would flush on their own. And, you know, just kind of seeing things out of the corner of your eye. So like you see in movies or TV shows, this caused a little bit of bickering and fighting between the two of us because my ex-husband was a skeptic, so of course to him it was all the wind, or you moved something and forgot about it, or whatever. And honestly, I'm not the type of person that will jump to conclusion that it is paranormal activity right away, because I had experienced so much already in my life. I kind of knew the difference between what the wind would cause and what would actually be caused by paranormal activity. So I wouldn't usually jump to that conclusion first off. It would kind of usually, I would go through all of the other things to see if that could be the situation. And I just started coming to the conclusion that there was something going on in the house. Now, the house that we lived in at the time was built in 1999, so fairly new house. It had only been owned by one family previous to us, and as far as we knew, there were no deaths in the house or anything like that. But of course, stuff can be attached to the land, or it can be because of someone living in the house. So when we would start discussing things that were going on, it actually caused a pretty big fight when we first moved in to that home together, because my ex-husband was very, very upset that he didn't know anything about me being a spiritual empath or having any spirit activity happen in the past. And it had just never come up in conversation with us. So he was quite angry. And like I said in one of the previous episodes, I have experienced quite a bit of kind of bullying, I guess you would say, when people would find out that I grew up in a haunted house and we had tons of experiences. So that had actually caused a pretty big rift in our relationship, because after a while, I think he started to realize that there was something there. He couldn't discount it anymore. And one of the biggest things, actually, on the night that we had had this discussion about the paranormal experiences that I had already had as a child, we were sitting in the living room just watching TV, and we were sitting on one of the love seats that was kind of close to where the front door was in the house. And all of a sudden the doorknob started to rattle like somebody was trying to get in the house. We had the deadbolt locked, so there was also a window there kind of right behind the love seat, and he looked out the window and could see where the front door was, and there was nobody there. And I actually jokingly said, "Oh, is that just the wind?" And he looked completely freaked out. So I really think, in my opinion, he was super freaked out about this kind of stuff. But of course, his defense with it all was just saying it wasn't real and it was the wind or whatever. But there was absolutely no way he could discount this that was happening. So like I said, we started seeing things out of the corner of our eye, footsteps, faucets being left on, things going missing, and of course the activity was a lot stronger in the evenings. So from what I could sense in the house, there were kind of two things going on. There was something that was really sinister that was kind of lurking in the background. It wasn't in the forefront, but it was kind of lurking in the background. And then we had another spiritual entity in the house that was completely benign. His name was Joe. And if you're wondering how I found out that, I actually asked one night. I worked up the courage when I saw him and I asked what his name was. And I believe that Joe was more of a kind of a protective spirit, and he was holding a lot of this negative stuff that was going on at bay. He was kind of like just keeping it all sort of calm as best as he could, and I will let you know in the next episode what that negative entity ended up being. But we often saw kind of just a silhouette of a man, and there was one night when I was lying in bed. My husband works shift work, so a lot of times I would go to bed a lot earlier than he would, and I was lying in bed one night and I was reading, and I just had one of those little like book lights, so I didn't have any of the overhead lights or lamps or anything on. So I was lying there and I just had my little book light on my book, and our bedroom door opened and I saw a silhouette of a man just kind of peek in, and I looked up and he closed the door and walked down over the stairs, and I could hear him walking down over the stairs. And I thought it was my ex-husband. So because of the way the lighting was, like I couldn't see any features or anything. So I got up out of bed and I went down and I kind of peeked over the railing and I said, well, what do you want? And he said, what are you talking about? And I said, well, you just came upstairs and like just looked in the room and just left. I was like, was there something you wanted? He said, I don't know what you're talking about. I didn't go upstairs. So that was one of the first experiences that I had with Joe. And like I said, he was completely benign. He was just kind of there. And I think he was there for a reason, to kind of keep the house as calm as possible, because there was something else that was going on. So there was another night when I was lying in bed and my husband was at work and his brother at the time was living with us, and he was also out. And we had an alarm system in the house, and I was lying in bed, and I remember I actually said to myself out loud, I was like, oh crap, I forgot to set the alarm. And I didn't want to get up, so I just kind of started to fall back to sleep again. And all of a sudden I heard beeps, and the alarm system had started counting down, because you know when you set an alarm system you have 30 seconds or whatever it is to get out of the house, so it kind of counts that down. And it was so weird, and I was like, well, what the heck? And I went downstairs and I saw like the panel for the alarm system. It was activated, it was actively counting down, and the little panel on the alarm system had been flipped down to reveal the numbers. So my belief is that Joe heard what I said and decided to set the alarm system for me. So like I said, there were things going on in this house. There was absolutely no way that you could say that this was a normal event. Like there's no way that that alarm system could have set itself. Absolutely no way. We didn't have a remote. And at the time, I think we had those old flip phones, like there were no smartphones. So there was no way that, you know, somebody could have accidentally set it with their phone or anything like that. So that was one thing. I think that's when I kind of realized that Joe is a bit of a protective spirit. So besides this, with what we were seeing at night, I would often wake up and there would be somebody standing in our room. And like I said, it wasn't evil, it wasn't benign, I wasn't scared of it. And our dogs would see stuff, so they would run out of a room or into a room tail wagging, just like somebody had called their name. We took a lot of pictures in that house that you could see orbs, especially around my dogs. My dogs were a really big target of what was in that house. And my husband would often tell me that when he would come home from work and I was gone during the day, especially if it was early in the morning, because I worked early morning shifts. I was a lifeguard and my work started at 4:45 a.m. So a lot of times he would come home and we would just kind of cross paths because he was working night shift. And he would go to bed, and he said that there were several times that he woke up and there was somebody standing at the foot of the bed just kind of looking at him. And I said, well, what did you do? Like, what did they look like? He said, it didn't look like anything. It was just kind of a silhouette. So we had these kind of shadows in the house. So he said he would just pull the covers up over his head, called the dogs up on the bed, and that was it. And with the dogs as well, like I said, they would run in and out of a room and just like they had been called. And like I described on one of the previous episodes, I had gone out into the computer room because somehow a ghost story that my mom had sent me in an email had started to print on our printer. And when I went out, our one dog, Keisha, she ran out of our bedroom. She had her tail tucked between her legs and down over the stairs, and our other dog wasn't too far behind her. So sometimes the dogs would run in and out of a room because they were happy, just like they were being called, but sometimes they would book it out of a room with their tail tucked between their legs and down over the stairs. And we also had one situation with our female dog, Keisha. She was a yellow lab, and we would wake up in the morning and she would be staring at a spot on the wall. And I'm telling you that like her nose was probably this far away from the wall, and it was always in the exact same spot. That she would do this early in the morning, and we would wake up and we would have to like continually call out to her to get her attention. So she would look away from this spot on the wall. Whatever she was seeing was always in the same spot, and it was always super early in the morning. So like I said at the beginning, it was kind of benign. We had Joe in the house who was sort of keeping everything else at bay, but unfortunately our relationship was not very good right from the very start, and I was not happy in the situation. But at the same time, you know, you love someone and you stay and you're hoping that things will change, and of course it wasn't always bad. It was, we had good times too, but it was not a very good situation. It was not a good atmosphere. So a lot of times when you have a negative atmosphere, it can attract paranormal activity as well. So after some time, things started to pick up and we could see Joe more frequently. The atmosphere in the house was starting to get heavier, and we had more frequent bouts of things moving around on their own. And there was one night when I woke up in the middle of the night. I was the only one home, everyone else was out, and it was just like somebody was having a party in the kitchen. You could hear doors opening and closing, and plates and cutlery and all of that kind of stuff was banging around, and I was terrified. I didn't want to go down there. So eventually in the morning when I got up and I went down, we did have a couple of the cupboards that were open. So I knew that what I was experiencing wasn't a dream. It couldn't have been. And then at one point I had a friend over for, I think she was just there for 3 or 4 days. She was visiting from university in a different province. And she is the same friend that I recounted in another episode that I was on the phone with, and we started having some paranormal experiences in the phone. So she was visiting me and staying in our spare bedroom. And there was one morning we got up. She had been there for, you know, a day or two. And very nonchalantly, when we were watching TV in the morning, just eating breakfast, she said, "Oh, I think I saw Joe last night." I said, "What?" She was like, "Joe." She said somebody came into the room and sat on the corner of the bed, and she said I just kept blinking my eyes because I thought I was dreaming, and she said he just slowly kind of disintegrated away. And I said, "Really?" She said, "Yeah, he wasn't scary at all. He just was kind of there." And she said, "I'm not really surprised because, you know, it's your house and you see this kind of stuff and you attract this kind of stuff." So she wasn't scared at all. She said very matter-of-factly that a ghost had come into her room and sat on the edge of her bed. So I was very thankful that she was not afraid and she didn't run from the house or anything like that. So Joe really was very much part of the family at that point. Like I said, he would set the alarm system and keep the atmosphere in the house as calm and quiet as he possibly could. But sometimes the darker entity would kind of come through and do things that were a little bit scarier. So you would every now and again hear strange noises. The dogs would run tail tucked from rooms. And then as things started to amp up, we actually had problems with what I referred to as a shapeshifter, where my husband would hear my voice calling out to him, or I would hear his voice calling out to me, or the dogs would hear us. And so this thing was starting to get a little bit more active. And like I said, at this time, the energy in the house started to get really dark and really heavy. So now we were starting to experience where the thing would actually take on the guise of our own voices, trying to get each other's attention. And sometimes, you know, it would cause a fight because we were so adamant that we had called out to each other, or we had said something. And then one morning, it was early in the morning, my husband and I were sitting in the living room watching TV or chatting or whatever it was, and his brother had come out of his room upstairs, and he was furious. He never ever told us what happened, but he came down over the stairs and he said, "This house is effed," and walked out the door. I still to this day don't know what he saw, what he experienced, but things at this point were starting to amp up in the house. And I was starting to have that reoccurring dream more and more frequently, where I would have something that was dark that I was fighting, and it would throw me down over the stairs. And I started hearing this dark, kind of gravelly, very gravelly voice at the same time, but I could never tell what it was saying. And usually on the same nights that I would have that dream, I would also dream of the man in the top hat that I described in earlier episodes as well. It's the man that I had been dreaming of my entire life, and I had no idea who he was, but he was always standing in a doorway. He had a top hat, he was a very large man, and he was very stern, and he was always trying to tell me something. And I could never figure out what he was trying to tell me, and it almost seemed like he was very, very frustrated that he couldn't relay whatever message it was that he was trying to tell me. So that's kind of where the paranormal activity in this house sort of began. Like I said, it started out very, very small, and then over time it became more and more frequent. Everyone was experiencing something in the house, even people that we had coming to visit, and things were starting to get darker and darker. So as our relationship was not going so well, the atmosphere in the house was very heavy. And in the next episode, I will tell you what happened and why Joe decided to leave us, and we were left with a very dark entity and things that were not so great happening in the house. But for now, that's everything I have for you from Tales from the Haunted Victorian. I hope you enjoyed it, and until next time, everybody, sweet dreams.